New legal battle. Two attorneys general take President Trump to court, claiming he's violating the Constitution. Innocent victims. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos flee as ISIS tries to seize a southern town. Papal ultimatum.
We haven't seen anything like this in modern church history.
Pope Francis insists every priest in a Nigerian diocese apologize. And moving day. The White House welcomes the first Catholic First Lady since Jackie Kennedy. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, June 12th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump is facing a new legal battle. The attorneys general of Washington, D.C. and Maryland announcing today they are filing a lawsuit against him. They claim the president is violating the Constitution by letting his businesses accept money from foreign governments. Correspondent Mark Irons is at the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. They're calling it a major lawsuit. The two attorneys general saying that President Trump needs to disentangle his namesake businesses from connections to foreign governments. They say this would avoid a conflict of interest between the Trump companies and the presidency.
It puts democracy at risk when the president is corruptible.
Maryland Attorney General Brian Frosh and Carl Racine, the Attorney General for D.C., filing a lawsuit alleging the president has committed, quote, unprecedented constitutional violations. They say President Trump's real estate holdings violate the emoluments clause of the Constitution, an anti-corruption clause that prohibits the president from accepting foreign gifts and payments without congressional approval. Frosh says the president is using his office to promote his business interest, citing one example where he says it appeared the president aligned himself with China for personal benefit.
During his campaign and after his election, he indicated he might end the one China policy. But on February 9th, he met with the president of China, pledged to continue the one China policy. 5 days later, China gave him trademark protection.
They will also be seeking the president's tax returns, which he has declined to voluntarily release, as is custom, saying they are under audit.
We don't know the extent of Mr. Trump's businesses. That's part of the problem.
The president said in January that he was handing over the reins of his businesses to his two adult sons, even though he is not legally required to separate from them.
I could actually run my business. I could actually run my business and run government at the same time. I don't like the way that looks, but I would be able to do that if I wanted to.
Asked today about the potential conflict of interest, Press Secretary Sean Spicer echoed the president.
The president's interests, as previously discussed, do not violate the emoluments clause.
Friday, lawyers for the Justice Department sought the dismissal of another lawsuit that makes similar claims. The Attorney General of Maryland said the president needs to show he is picking the good of the country over the needs of his businesses. Lauren?
Mark, why is this an issue if there isn't a law that says that he has to give up his businesses and there isn't a law that says he has to release his tax returns?
Well, as the Attorney General for Washington, D.C. said, quote, countries are swarming and fawning over themselves to give money to the president's businesses so they can curry favor with the administration. They say the lawsuit is an attempt to prevent even the appearance of a conflict of interest to safeguard the office of the presidency. The Department of Justice is sure to have a legal response to that in the days ahead. Lauren?
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is ready to go on the record. He wants his testimony to be open to the public when he appears before the Senate Intelligence Committee tomorrow. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi previews the high-stakes hearing and this week's other big congressional stories. Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The Attorney General says he wants the American people to hear directly from him. Instead of a confidential, behind-closed-doors meeting, he'll be answering tough questions about Russian meddling in the 2016 election and any possible ties with the Trump campaign.
During his confirmation hearing in January, Sessions told senators he did not meet with the Russians during the campaign. In March, after it became public he did meet with the Russian ambassador to the United States, Sessions recused himself from the investigation. lawmakers still want to know if he met a third time with the ambassador. And we expect questions about his role in the investigation before he stepped aside, and why he approved firing FBI Director James Comey. Besides the Russian investigation swallowing a lot of oxygen here on the Hill, Republican senators are crafting their health care bill behind closed doors.
I am not at all comfortable with the House passed bill, and indeed I would oppose the House passed bill. The Senate bill is still a work in progress. We haven't seen actual language. We're trying to influence the direction of that.
Healthcare scholar James Capretta served in the George W. Bush White House and says he thinks it's possible the Senate can pass healthcare reform in July. He says Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will likely pressure Republicans to get on board.
Telling his rank and file members, hey, we have to do this. We don't have a choice. We got to pass something big and substantial here. We've been talking about it for a long time. It really makes the rank and file folks think hard about not complying and not being with the program, because they don't want to. He doesn't ask that very often of them, and when he does, it's really serious and important.
President Trump met Republican congressional leaders last week and said the Senate is sure to get health care across the finish line this summer.
Number 2 Senate Republican John Cornyn predicted they'd actually meet that goal by the end of July at the very latest. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Puerto Rico votes to become the 51st U.S. state, but only Congress can make that happen. Yesterday's referendum coincides with the 100th anniversary of the United States granting U.S. citizenship to Puerto Ricans. Now the island is billions of dollars in debt and struggles with high poverty rates. Boycotts from several parties in Puerto Rico cut voter turnout to 23%. U.S. troops come under fire in Afghanistan. A convoy transporting American and Afghan soldiers was ambushed, and this weekend 3 U.S. soldiers were killed, another wounded, when they were attacked by an Afghan soldier who also died. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the murders, saying a loyalist infiltrated the Afghan army just to attack foreign forces. British police report a new arrest in connection with this month's attack on London Bridge. They accuse the 19-year-old suspect of violating the Terrorism Act. 6 other men are also being held in conjunction with the June 3rd vehicle and knife attack, but they have not been identified or charged. Britain's terror level remains severe, meaning another attack is highly likely. Opposition protesters clash with police across Russia today. Tens of thousands of people attended rallies against the Kremlin. Hundreds of people were arrested, including 700 in Moscow and 500 in St. Petersburg. The opposition leader's wife says he was arrested before he even made it to the rally. Hundreds of thousands of people are forced to flee as the Filipino military fights back against militants linked to ISIS. The violence has already killed more than 200 people, including 29 civilians. The fighting is so intense, it's impossible to get an accurate toll. A military spokesman in the Philippines says the U.S. military has been asked for non-combat assistance. The head of the Chaldean Catholic Church returns to Mosul, Iraq, 3 years after ISIS pushed Christians out. Patriarch Louis Raphael Sacco visited churches and monasteries recently liberated by government forces. He met with the Major General of the Iraqi army, who told him he hopes for a swift return of Christians to Mosul. In Detroit, ICE agents are arresting Iraqi nationals, including Chaldean Christians who have committed crimes. This comes after President Trump removed Iraq from his travel ban executive order. The 2 countries organized an agreement to deport Iraqi nationals subject to removal orders. Steve Ashana is executive director of a Demand for Action, a group advocating for religious minorities in the Middle East. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Are the Iraqi nationals being sent back because they committed serious crimes in the U.S.?
To be fair, not everybody who was detained has committed crimes. Some of the people have, some haven't. Some of these were very low-level, small charges where they've served their time 25, sometimes 30 years ago. So a lot of people are getting swept up in this, both people who had prior convictions and then people who haven't.
The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Detroit Field Office told us this. Each of these individuals received full and fair immigration proceedings, after which a federal immigration judge found them ineligible for any form of relief under U.S. law and ordered them removed. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, a lot of these orders came, 20, sometimes 30 years ago, when Iraq was a very different place. Right now, the United States has designated Christians, including Assyrians, Chaldeans, and Syriacs, as victims of genocide. And I think the idea that we're sending Christians who our government recognizes are victims of genocide to the country where they are victimized, I think that shows a lack of mercy and really goes against the spirit of not only U.S. law, but also the gospel that we believe in.
Isn't there some provision to protect these Christians?
In this case, really, it's going to be a situation where someone like the President of the United States has to step in. He had promised in the past that he was going to protect our community, but the people that are being sent back now are being sent back as a direct result of a deal between the United States and the Iraqi government to accept these people. So this was part of the deal in the Trump travel ban to remove Iraq from the restricted list. So at this point, I think that's really the only thing that's going to save them.
Stephen Oshana, thank you for joining us. Stephen is the Executive Director of A Demand for Action.
Thank you so much.
Pope Francis is asking priests from a diocese in Nigeria to accept the bishop appointed to them 5 years ago, or risk suspension. The Holy Father's strong words came during his meeting with a delegation from Ahirya Diocese last Thursday in the Vatican. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, the bishop in question was appointed by Pope Benedict in 2012. Why are members of the clergy and the faithful there opposing his appointment?
Lauren, Bishop Okpaleke was not chosen from among the local priests of that diocese. Ahirya is in Mumbubaise, a predominantly Catholic region of Imo State in southern Nigeria, whereas Bishop Okpaleke is from Anambra State, which borders Imo to the north. So they sent a petition in 2012 when the bishop was appointed on behalf of the coalition of these Igbo Catholics, and they said that no priest from Baise origin is a bishop today is, quote, mind-boggling. The petition that they sent to Benedict said, citing that they had more priests per capita in that diocese than any other diocese in Nigeria, and in their opinion, they could have found somebody from that pool of priests qualified to lead the diocese instead of bringing in an outsider, in their opinion.
How is Pope Francis proposing to solve the crisis?
Lauren, during the audience, the Pope requested simply that the diocese receive Bishop Okpaleke, and Pope Francis asked that every priest in the diocese, whether he resides there, works elsewhere, even priests that are from that diocese who work abroad, he wants them to write a letter of apology personally to Pope Francis, asking for forgiveness for their disobedience, for not letting the bishop carry out his work. That's a very strong gesture by the Pope on his part. We haven't seen anything like this in modern church history. The Pope added, whoever fails to do this within 30 days is ipso facto, which means by the very fact, suspended from all divine things, such as the celebration of the sacrament. So very strong words. We'll see what happens in the next 30 days.
That is a heavy, heavy punishment. What reason is the Pope giving for this decision?
Because, as he said, Lauren, quote, the people of God are scandalized. And he reminded us that Jesus said, whoever causes scandal must suffer the consequences. Pope Francis said he'd been following these events since he took office and admitted that he thought about even suppressing the diocese, which means the diocese would no longer exist. But he later decided that the church is a mother and cannot abandon her many children. So Pope Francis obviously thinking of the faithful there. So he decided not to repress the diocese, but asked for this letter of apology, and hopefully they can move forward towards reconciliation.
Sounds like the Pope is using a big stick in this instance. Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Lauren.
Pope Francis tells Italy's president he's concerned about a lack of jobs for young people. The Holy Father visited the presidential palace on Saturday in Rome and encouraged Italians to cling to hope despite economic woes. He says remembering fundamental values and having family dignity helps preserve hope in troubling times. Coming up, independence vote. Kurds consider breaking away from Iraq. Will it affect Christians in the war-torn area? And they're here. The first family is reunited in the East Wing.
Padre, Figlio e Spirito Santo.
Pope Francis focuses on the Holy Trinity during the Angelus address yesterday at the Vatican. Sunday marked the Solemnity of the Trinity, and the Holy Father spoke about God's love for all in the three persons. Hundreds of police officers in China reportedly demolish a Christian church still under construction and arrest its parishioners. The group China Aid posted this image taken May 6th of the church in the Henan province. Communist Party officials say the church was an illegal structure and had to be destroyed. The group says of the 40 arrested, 8 are still in police custody. The president of the Iraqi Kurdish regional government announced on Twitter Kurds will hold an independence referendum in September. The semi-autonomous region has been instrumental in the fight against ISIS. Joining us now is Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, the representative of the Kurdistan regional government to the U.S., almost as if you are an ambassador, but not quite a representative. Tell me, over the weekend, the Iraqi Prime Minister had a phone call with the Kurdish region president, Masoud Barzani, and they talked about how you're going to fight ISIS, but they did not talk about the referendum. Why do you think that is?
They've talked about the referendum and the question of self-determination before, so it wasn't a surprise to President Abadi. We have kept both Baghdad and our friends, for example, in Washington and elsewhere, very well informed of our aspirations to have a referendum on independence sometime this fall. And finally, we've announced September 25th as the date.
You already function with near autonomy from Baghdad. Why do you want this referendum? What will it do for the Kurds?
We do have autonomy within Iraq. However, we had hoped that after 2003, Iraq would be a federal and a democratic country, a country where the government would be a government of partnership, of equal partners between Kurds and Arabs. But we don't have that. We don't have a government where everything is done by consensus. We have more and more of the Arab leadership talking about majority rule, which means that, you know, the majority, the winners, will dictate everything. There are many other issues. For example, we're fighting ISIS. The Peshmerga are the most effective force against ISIS.
Not the Iraqis?
I would say most effective. I would say worldwide it's recognized that it's the Peshmerga. Of course, the Iraqi forces are also very brave and we commend them. But the issue for us is that, for example, we can't buy weapons and we can't receive weapons direct. All the weapons have to go through Baghdad. If we are, or when we are, a sovereign independent state, we can do those things. We can more easily borrow on the international bond markets and so on.
So, as a representative, what do you say to those people who are opposing this vote?
There has been some reaction already against the referendum, but I have to say that most of the reaction often also recognizes that it is the legitimate right of the people of Kurdistan to have self-determination. We did expect this kind of reaction. We've never expected our friends to encourage us. Most bureaucrats in whatever civil service they work in, they like borders to stay as they are.
And I think you're going to have quite an issue with Turkey, and the Turkish Prime Minister has called this referendum irresponsible. But that's all the time we have. I wish we could talk more. Thank you so much for joining us, Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman,
You're welcome.
Representative from Kurdistan. It's official. There's a Catholic living in the White House for the first time since the Kennedys. First Lady Melania Trump and son Barron moved into the White House yesterday. The two were living in Trump Tower in New York as Barron finished the school year. He'll start school at St. Andrew's Episcopal School. That's just outside of Washington, D.C. He'll start in the fall. And the First Lady tweeted this picture with the caption, "Looking forward to the memories we'll make in our new home. #MovingDay." Up next, a pro-life OBGYN warns us about a disturbing trend in medicine.
And this is something that I don't think medicine was ever meant to be.
Ordinations. Meet the newest batch of priests.
Soltanto così il Signore viene, ci consola e ci dà la missione di consolare gli altri.
Pope Francis reflects on the gift of consolation during Mass this morning. The Holy Father says God is a consoler and we should console others when needed with an open heart. A Gallup poll says about half of Americans believe physician-assisted suicide is morally acceptable. Earlier, I talked to a doctor who's defending the value of life. Joining us now is Dr. Christina Francis, Chairman of the Board of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. There are about 4,000 of you nationwide. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
As a leading healthcare professional, you have said that medicine is moving more and more towards supporting death in so many forms. What do you mean by this?
Well, so unfortunately, the practice of medicine has, especially in the last 20 years, been moving more and more towards supporting things like abortion and physician-assisted suicide, as opposed to really supporting life from the moment of conception until the moment of natural death. And this is something that I don't think medicine was ever meant to be. If you look at the original Hippocratic Oath, it supported life-affirming medicine. It supported never recommending an abortifacient remedy to a woman or ever recommending a death-inducing drug to any patient. And as I'm sure your viewership can see as well, we really have moved far away from that.
Right, and I know that this is something we talk about quite frequently. Now, you did a radio interview, and you were challenged on this public radio show that you weren't more upfront about your faith as it relates to your profession. And let me just say, give a quote here of what you said. It says, "So my faith compels me. I think I feel obligated and compelled to share the scientific data and medical data that's out there because oftentimes it can be misquoted or left out." What is your concern?
Right. Well, so on that radio show, as you referenced, there was an abortion provider who stated that he felt that his faith is what compelled him to perform abortions. And so they wanted me on there as well as a Protestant, as a Christian, to share my views on abortion. The reason I abstained from stating my faith right up front was because most times when I get into discussions with people who support abortion, if I try to bring my religious beliefs into that discussion, I'm often told, we don't want to hear about your religious beliefs because I don't necessarily share them. I want to hear what science has to say about this, what medicine has to say, what the studies show. And so that's really why I started with that. I'm not in any way ashamed of my faith, and it is my Christian faith that, like I said, compels me to practice compassionate medicine. But I think it's also really important for people to know that those of us who oppose abortion, we have science on our side, we have logic, we have reasons on our side, and the studies support our claim at APLOG that abortion not only kills an innocent human being, but it's also extremely bad for women.
Well, you know, I have to say, I'm so glad that you were actually invited onto that radio show because oftentimes the pro-life side isn't represented. So thank you so much for doing that, and thank you for joining us here on News Nightly. Dr. Christina Francis, Chairman of the Board, American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists.
Thank you very much.
That does it for us this evening. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. We leave you tonight welcoming 3 of the newest priests of the church. This ordination, led by Bishop Michael Burbidge, took place in Arlington, Virginia this weekend. Last year, 548 men were ordained in the United States. That's half as many as in 1965, but higher than recent years. I'll see you again tomorrow. Good night, and God bless.